Hi, my name is Lora Mahaffey. This is my very first video and the second part of my G45 2014 audition for the design team. Today we are going to be talking about Altoid tins. Altered Altoid tins. Altered Altoid tins. In particular, we're going to be talking about the facades that I make for them. I get lots of questions about how to make these, so I'd like to focus on that today. I hope the information that I impart is useful to you and that you have fun making one. I know I do. Without further ado, here we go. The first thing that I do is I like to draw a template for the facade. So I'm going to start with that, a piece of graph paper, and then the tin, which I have taken the lid off of, and I cut the tabs off and sand those down. And I also sand down the box, the body of the tin, because when you take that little glaze off of there and rough this up, it gives more tooth for the glue to stick to. So I sand that stuff and have it all prepped and ready to go. So I've got my tin. I sort of center it in the graph paper. I draw around the tin, and then I decide how far out I want my facade to be. I want it far enough out so that it's got a flange or whatever you want to call that edge out here, and enough space that I can draw the interior lines. But I don't want it too thick unless I'm going to add lots of detail. This is a nice balance. So I draw those lines in, and I kind of hand draw the arc, but you can also use a compass for this. This is an ogive arch, but if you just draw an arc with your compass and find the apex of the arc and then draw in your ogive arches, if that's what you would like to do, that's what I do, and then I just erase the true arc lines. So I've done that, and then I repeat it on the inside. I decide where I want my cuts to be inside of the tin edge, because you don't want the rim to show, but you want the opening as wide as possible. So I kind of figure that out by where my tin edges are from my tracing. Then I copy this and I make a template. So I have things to save, and I can go back and use these later if I want to. So I have a template, and I then use a piece of bookboard, which is nice, thick, strong cardboard, and I draw a bunch of them on the piece, so I'm not wasting the sheet, and that's pretty economical. I draw a bunch of them on there with my template, and then I of course cut it out. And I also use this, once I've finished cutting out my pieces, to cut. I use it as a template to cut the papers out for the facades front and back. So you need a front and a back for the facade. So I want to mention also that when I cut these out, I use these registration lines. I add registration lines to these so that I can see when I'm using my box knife where to stop my cuts. So I use a straight edge with a cork back so that it doesn't slide on the paper, and I use a straight edge, a strong, good straight edge with a nice handle that I can control on the cardboard. And when I cut these out, I make a few passes. I don't try to make one single cut along here, because you don't have very good control of that. So I make a few gentle passes on the piece. 4 or 5 will do. And I cut the whole thing out first on the outside, so that I've got the piece here, and then I cut the inside pieces with my straight edge. And then this arc I do last. So once again, with the box knife, just gentle passes with the box knife. You don't have to try to cut it all out at the same time. 4 or 5 passes will do it. And because this is cut out of the cardboard, you have more maneuverability. So if you need to move it around to get that nice shape, you can do that. So, just a few passes. Don't try to cut it all in one go. Be patient with it. It will happen, and you'll get a nice cut that way. Much nicer cut than if you try to do it in one big, huge cut. It won't be straight. So, and make sure that you have a good blade in your box knife. So change your blade out. After I do that, I cut the papers out for the front and back of the tin, and the inside and the outside of the tin as well. Now this dimension is smaller than the outside dimension, so you want to make sure you measure both separately. You cut pieces for both separately, and you can use your tin as a template for drawing the larger pieces as well. Just when you cut when you cut the inside one out, if you cut inside your pencil lines, it will actually help a lot to make this fit on the inside a lot better. So I've got those all cut out. I'm going to glue all of these into the tins, and I'm also going to glue my papers onto the facade front and back. After that's completely dry, I sand. And what I do is I take some coarse sandpaper and I sand the edges of the facade and the inside edges of the facade, and I also sand the edges of the tin. Then I take another piece of sandpaper, a fine piece of sandpaper, and sort of polish all of that up and smooth it out. And sanding is a really great idea because if you've wobbled on your cuts, the sanding will help heal that up and make it look straight. So I've sanded it, and I've sanded it with finer paper, and I've made it all nice and smooth. And then I ink the edges. I ink the outside edges of the facade. I ink the inside edges, and then I also ink around the edges of the tin. So I've got all of my papers on, I've got everything sanded, and I've got everything inked up, and I start working on the center image. She is a really charming image. I'll mention I got her image from a page out of the Birdsong collection, the 12 by 12 collection, called Shanghai Girls. That was the paper called Shanghai Girls. The rest of the papers that I've used for this, I use Botanical Tea for. So everything else on here is from Botanical Tea. So I've got her image, and I really like her. I think she's charming, so I'm going to use her. And I want her as much into the foreground as possible, because if I put her flat on the bottom of the tin, she's going to disappear. So I've got a lot of scrap cardboard that I've used to build up this image so that she is a foreground image, that she's pushed forward. So I built her up quite a lot. And I cut a whole lot of stuff out. I probably use about half of what I cut out because I like to have it all out and play with the images. So I know she's going to be in the center and in the front. So I've cut a bunch of other things out, and I'm going to use those in the back of her image. And I struggled with this a little bit because I had flowers and things cut out too, and I thought, well, she's the flower. She's the thing that the butterflies are attracted to. So why not just use her and the butterflies and have them just be attracted to her pretty face? So that was what I did. So it was fairly easy to determine after that where the butterflies were going to be placed. I used various depths using foam tape and the cardboard, just like I did with her image, just not as thick or as much in the foreground, to give this depth and a little more play with the visual. I think it looks better when you have, 3 or 4 different depths going on inside of the tin. So I did that, and I was happy with the placement, so I went ahead and glued everything down. I haven't glued anything down on the facade yet. I've only glued down what's inside of the tin. So the facade is still loose. I don't glue that on the tin until I have most of the detail on that. So I've glued the interior of the tin in, and I like that, and I've set that aside. Now I'm going to work on the facade. I have lots of die cut scraps that I keep that I painted white, and I have glued those on, and I like that a lot. I'm not going to add the butterfly details until later because they do stick out. They're a little three-dimensional, and I'm going to put those on after I glue the facade onto the tin. So I put everything else on there. I'm pretty happy with it. So I glue the facade onto the tin, just glue around the edges of the tin and stick the facade on and position it so that it's centered and no metal is showing or anything. And I let that dry. And then after I do that, I like to take a piece of ribbon or lace or something and glue this on between the tin and the facade, because I think that it makes that transition between those two pieces softer. It's prettier that way. After I do that, I add the butterfly details that I want on the outside of the facade. And I also add the extra details for the back, which are kind of pretty. And I make sure also that I ink everything along the edges. I don't like to have those raw white edges out there, so I try to match the inks with what's on the paper and ink that up so that it's not glaring. The other thing I want to say really quickly is when I cut fancy cuts, I use a scalpel. This is a real medical scalpel I get from a medical supply place. I only use this for fancy cutting. I do not use this to cut facades. The cardboard is very, very hard. It will cut the blade and you could hurt yourself, so don't do that. Just use it for detail work like I do if you choose to. Otherwise a box knife is fine, or a pair of good scissors. So I've got all that done, and then I want to think about the base. The base is 3 pieces. The base is a little candlestick that I got from a craft store, and it is a metal washer. I don't know if you can see, there's 3 pieces there. It's a candlestick, a metal washer, and a round wooden disc, just like this. Just these discs that I sand the edge of to soften them up. I glue the washer onto the disc. I paint all of this white. I painted the candlestick white, and then I glued the candlestick to these 2 pieces. After it's all dried, I glue them to the bottom of the tin, making sure that everything is centered. Now, I like to use a washer because it's got a lot of weight on it. It's heavy, and I use the disc because it gives you visual weight. It makes the candlestick look more substantial. It doesn't make the tin look like it's teetering and it's gonna fall over. And because the washer has a lot of weight to it naturally, it does give physical stability to the piece as well. It's not gonna fall over. So I do all of that. I glue them all together. I make sure everything is in place. The last thing I do on these is I sign everything. I make sure everything is signed. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I hope that you are going to get some useful information out of this, and I want to take the opportunity to thank Graphic45 for the opportunity to audition for their team. So enjoy making Altoid tins. Thanks a lot.